But of course, I want to see Caitlin treated fairly and appropriately in the league. I would say, seems like she can take care of herself. She's a tough player. I think it may be lost on some people who are new to basketball in terms of a little bit of the controversy in the WNBA.
Is her right to a peaceful workplace, a non-hostile work environment, are those rights being violated by the WNBA?
The bombshell that just dropped in the basketball world has NBA Commissioner Adam Silver seen red, and frankly, it's about time someone in a position of power finally said what millions of fans have been screaming for months. But this isn't just about bad officiating anymore. We're now talking about federal investigations, civil rights violations, and potential congressional probes that could tear apart the entire WNBA structure.
The Wall Street Journal in this article is calling, or at least saying out loud, that maybe Caitlin Clark's civil rights are actually being violated.
A former White House official just dropped an absolute nuclear bomb, claiming that the WNBA's treatment of Caitlin Clark violates her civil rights and demanding a federal investigation. When former government officials start talking about civil rights violations in professional sports, you know this situation has spiraled completely out of control.
Maybe WNBA leadership should at least have to go sit in front of some people and answer some very uncomfortable questions.
The Wall Street Journal, one of the most respected publications in America, published an opinion piece essentially calling for a congressional investigation into Clark's treatment. When the Wall Street Journal is writing about basketball fouls as a civil rights issue, you know we've crossed into uncharted territory.
Now, it talks about the fact that Caitlin Clark has basically done for the WNBA what Michael Jordan did for the NBA, right? Instead of protecting its transformative star, the league's leadership ignores the relentless targeting of Miss Clark.
Stephen A. Smith just poured gasoline on this fire by declaring that the government would have a case if they decided to investigate the WNBA's handling of Clark.
They're going to be silent? Now, before you go any further, I'm not here saying that the case will be won by the government if it got to that point or anything like that. I'm saying they have a case.
Smith basically said what everyone's been thinking. If you reverse the races and imagine white players systematically targeting the league's only black superstar while referees allowed it, there would be federal investigations launched immediately. The double standard is so obvious that even mainstream media can't ignore it anymore.
Galvanizing talent that has done wonders for the NBA. If she is seen to be physically getting abused on a basketball court in a way that is such a clear and flagrant discrepancy compared to what happens to others, that man is not going to say something?
But let's back up and examine exactly what evidence has created this constitutional crisis in women's basketball. The statistical analysis that started this avalanche came from independent basketball analysts who did what the WNBA apparently refused to do. They actually counted the fouls. The data is absolutely staggering and, frankly, embarrassing for a professional league. Caitlin Clark was flagrantly fouled 6 times during her rookie season. 6 times! To put that in perspective, that's more flagrant fouls than most players receive in their entire careers. And Clark managed to rack them up in just her first year. Those were just the flagrant fouls that were actually called. The video evidence shows dozens of incidents where Clark was clearly fouled with no whistle, contacted unnecessarily with no consequences, and targeted with aggressive plays that would have resulted in technical fouls or ejections if they happened to any other superstar player in professional basketball. This systematic pattern of differential treatment is exactly what civil rights advocates look for when building discrimination cases.
But there's this whole conversation around Caitlin Clark that these women tried to invent this false narrative that the refs actually favor her and officiate her differently, like Angel Reese tried to say it before, and you see it right here. And it feels like the refs in the WNBA buys into it. Like they're like, we're not going to give her calls.
Everyone called out WNBA referees directly for their continuous missed calls on Clark. When ESPN, a network that has broadcast partnerships and financial relationships with the WNBA, publicly criticizes the officiating, you know the situation has reached a breaking point. They basically said what everyone with functioning eyeballs already knew. The refs were failing Caitlin Clark, and by extension, they were failing the entire league. The most damning evidence came from game tape analysis that showed a clear pattern of inconsistent officiating that's now being examined through a civil rights lens. When other players drove to the basket, they got calls. When Clark drove to the basket, she got hammered with no whistle. When other players got breathed on beyond the three-point line, they got free throws. When Clark got body checked while shooting threes, referees somehow missed it completely. The bias was so obvious that even casual fans started creating compilation videos showing the disparity.
It's insane, and none of that was called. Finally, at the end of the one play, they called the foul because it was like indisputable. I mean, she got whacked on the arm and then gets hit to the ground. But they weren't going to call any of the other fouls leading up to it. I mean, this is what Caitlin Clark is dealing with.
Here's the smoking gun evidence that has civil rights lawyers salivating. Clark's teammate Sophie Cunningham went on record saying, "The star player of the league is not being protected."
It was just part of the game. I think the refs had a lot to do with that. It was a build-up for a couple of years now of them just not protecting, the star player of the WNBA. And so at the end of the day, I'm going to protect my teammates. That's what I do, and I'm a team player. So
when your own teammates are publicly calling out the league's failure to protect you, that's not just bad optics. That's potential testimony in a federal discrimination case. Clark herself provided what could be the most crucial evidence when she stated, "Everybody is physical with me. They get away with things others don't."
Yeah, I think everybody's physical with me. They get away with things that, probably other people don't get away with. And it's tough, but that's just the fact of the matter. It's like, this is a very physical game.
That's not just a frustrated player complaining about tough treatment. That's documented testimony of disparate treatment that civil rights lawyers dream about. Adam Silver knows that quote could end up in federal court documents if this situation continues escalating. The nuclear option became real when A'ja Wilson, a three-time league MVP, admitted that race is a huge thing in the WNBA's treatment of different players. When established stars are acknowledging that racial dynamics are influencing how players get treated, you've crossed from officiating controversy into civil rights territory. Silver understands that once racial discrimination becomes part of the conversation, this stops being a sports story and becomes a federal case. Adam Silver, who has always been measured and diplomatic in his public statements, finally reached his limit when he realized this officiating controversy had attracted the attention of federal investigators and congressional representatives. His previous comments about wanting to see Clark treated fairly now look like desperate damage control attempts rather than simple diplomatic statements. Silver said he wants to see Clark treated fairly, but what he really meant was, fix this embarrassing problem before federal investigators start examining every aspect of WNBA operations. The breaking point came when Silver realized that the poor officiating wasn't just hurting Caitlin Clark. It was creating a constitutional crisis that could bring federal oversight into professional sports. Clark brought unprecedented attention, sold-out arenas, television ratings that shattered records, and mainstream media coverage that women's basketball had never experienced. All of that progress was being threatened by a civil rights scandal that could result in congressional hearings and federal intervention. Silver's frustration became explosive when he acknowledged that societal issues were driving much of the outrage about Clark's treatment. What he was really saying was that the racial dynamics of this controversy had created a public relations nightmare that could result in federal investigations. The league looked petty, jealous, and frankly discriminatory when their officials couldn't protect their biggest star from systematic targeting. The evidence kept piling up throughout Clark's rookie season in ways that terrified Silver about potential federal scrutiny. Fans documented missed calls, analysts broke down biased officiating, and even opposing players started acknowledging that Clark wasn't getting a fair whistle. The Chicago Sky's Chennedy Carter hip-checked Clark in what Silver himself called a welcome to the league moment. But the real issue wasn't that individual foul, it was the pattern of allowing that type of treatment to continue without consequences. Here's what really got Silver panicking. The statistics that civil rights advocates are now citing are absolutely devastating for the WNBA's credibility. Clark has missed 10 games due to injuries from excessive physical play, and ratings plummeted 55% without her on the court.
3 injuries have sidelined her for 10 games and the All-Star game. Ratings plummeted 55%.
The league's most valuable asset is being systematically targeted, injured, and sidelined while generating the exact evidence pattern that federal investigators love to see in discrimination cases. The WNBA's officiating inconsistency was making the entire league look not just Bush League, but potentially discriminatory. Professional sports depend on the perception of fairness and competency. When fans can clearly see that superstar players are being treated differently because of racial bias rather than skill level, it destroys more than the integrity of competition. It creates federal cases. The statistical deep dive revealed something that terrified Silver about potential government oversight. Clark's foul calling disparity wasn't just about missed calls on offense. It extended to how defensive fouls were called when she was guarding opponents. She was getting called for ticky-tack fouls that weren't being called consistently across the league, while simultaneously not receiving protection when she was the one being fouled. This systematic differential treatment is exactly what federal civil rights investigators look for.
They're calling out the WNBA and Kathy Engelbert. Why? Because of the officiating.
Silver's anger intensified when he realized that this civil rights controversy was actively destroying the WNBA's growth potential. The league had finally found its golden goose in Clark, a player who could sell tickets, generate buzz, and bring new fans to women's basketball. Instead of protecting that investment, referees were allowing her to get beaten up night after night, creating civil rights storylines that could result in federal oversight of professional basketball. The most explosive revelation came when analysts compared Clark's treatment to historical civil rights cases in professional sports. The systematic targeting, the differential officiating, the failure of league officials to provide equal protection, it all created a pattern that civil rights lawyers immediately recognized as actionable discrimination. What pushed Silver completely over the edge was realizing that this wasn't just about basketball anymore, it was about the survival of professional sports without federal intervention. The WNBA's partnership with the NBA represents a significant investment in women's sports, and a civil rights scandal was threatening to bring government oversight that could fundamentally change how professional leagues operate. The cover-up attempts made Silver even more desperate about federal attention. Instead of acknowledging the obvious officiating issues and working to fix them, WNBA officials tried to downplay the controversy and suggest that Clark's treatment was normal rookie hazing. Silver knew that federal investigators would see those denial attempts as evidence of institutional discrimination rather than isolated officiating mistakes. The final straw came when Silver realized that the civil rights angle had created exactly the kind of federal scrutiny that could kill not just the WNBA's momentum, but potentially bring congressional oversight to all professional sports. Instead of talking about Clark's incredible rookie season and the growth of women's basketball, everyone was talking about discrimination lawsuits and federal investigations. Silver's response has been swift and panicked because he knows this controversy has jumped from sports pages to potential Supreme Court cases. Behind the scenes, sources suggest he's been pressuring WNBA leadership not just about officiating inconsistencies, but about the existential threat of federal civil rights enforcement. His public comments about wanting Clark treated fairly weren't suggestions. They were desperate ultimatums to prevent government intervention in professional basketball. The message from Silver is now crystal clear. Fix your discrimination problem immediately, or risk having federal investigators, congressional committees, and civil rights enforcement agencies crawling through every aspect of professional basketball operations. When former White House officials are calling for civil rights probes and respected media outlets are demanding congressional investigations, you've moved far beyond typical sports controversies into constitutional law territory. The evidence is overwhelming, the discrimination pattern is undeniable, and Adam Silver's patience has officially exploded into full panic mode. This WNBA officiating scandal has now attracted the attention of civil rights advocates, federal investigators, and congressional representatives who could fundamentally change how professional sports leagues operate in America. What do you think? Should federal investigators launch a full civil rights probe into the WNBA's treatment of Caitlin Clark? Or is Adam Silver's behind-the-scenes pressure enough to fix this discrimination scandal?